Photography, please.
Okay, but we have permission. Oh, we have permission.
Please.
Okay.
Only for 5 minutes.
They are not the only ones wary. An Israeli patrol passes by. The area we are in is particularly sensitive. At this precise spot in the year 2000, 3 Israeli soldiers were captured by Hezbollah in a daring sting operation. As elsewhere, the blue line here is ambiguous, an explosive front line marked only by intermittent painted barrels. In 2000, when Israel informed the UN of its plan to withdraw from South Lebanon, then UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan sent his special envoy, Norwegian diplomat Terry Rod Larsen, to the region. His mission was to negotiate a line of withdrawal. The blue line is not supposed to be the final decision on the international border.
The blue line is not the border. The blue line is, the official name is actually line of withdrawal. This was the line which was identified in 2000 by the United Nations for the sole purpose of verifying Israeli withdrawal from the Lebanese territory. So it was done without any prejudice to a future border demarcation agreement between Lebanon and Israel or between Lebanon and Syria.
Israel surprised the UN by withdrawing from South Lebanon sooner than expected. Larsen rushed back to the region. He personally supervised the demarcation of the blue line in consultation with all sides. At times, the process involved haggling over inches. Neither side wanted to compromise. There were a number of places which proved especially difficult to secure agreement from both Lebanon and Israel, including the Sheba Farms region.
Both Lebanon and Israel had reservations about this line, and they voiced their reservations in 2000. However, the point at that time was to disengage the forces, to have the Israeli army withdraw back to Israel.
Israel refused to withdraw from the Sheba Farms region. Lebanon declared Israel's withdrawal in 2000 to be incomplete. To this day, Lebanese officials argue that Israel's occupation of the Sheba Farms means resistance is justified.
I told Larsen, the blue line is from Naqoura to Hasbani, and we, as the Lebanese state, are committed to respecting it, whichever official, legal or illegal forces are deployed there. But if Israel commits violations across the blue line, with planes flying over the area and violating our airspace, then we reserve the right to respond. This right exists, and Larsen can tell you that. The Sheba Farms is an occupied region. We do not consider it as part of the blue line, and so our right to take it back is legitimate, a right which is acknowledged by the UN.
Terry Rod Larsen returned to the region in the following years. He continued to affirm the UN position that the Sheba Farms is Syrian, not Lebanese territory. This argument does not go down well in Beirut or Damascus.
When two countries agree and sign upon the demarcation of their borders, the UN should then endorse this agreement. Larsen's rejection came to protect Israel and to allow its military forces to remain in their positions in the Sheba Farms. It was a big mistake, and it damaged UN credibility.
Once again, war was to overshadow the deadlock. In 2006, Israel launched a full-scale war against Lebanon after Hezbollah captured 2 of its soldiers. The 33-day war devastated Lebanon. But UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which ended the war, put the disputed case of the Sheba Farms back in the limelight.
The Sheba Farms is an important issue, which is specifically included in Resolution 1701. The Secretary General was asked to study this issue and to come up with some proposal. There was a proposal from the Lebanese government, so-called 7-point proposal, which included some ideas concerning Sheba farms.
The Lebanese government proposed a temporary solution to the dispute over the Blue Line and the Sheba farms, that Israel withdraw and UNIFIL forces deploy in the region. To this day, Israel continues to occupy the Sheba farms. The Sheba farms is a major focal point of dispute, but it is not the only one. Just a few kilometers away, the village of Al-Ghajja also highlights the Gordian knot of disputed borderlines, security fears, and questions of identity. Along with the Sheba farms, the village of Al-Ghajja ranks as one of the thorniest cases of dispute between Lebanon and Syria on the one side and Israel on the other. Al-Ghajja is just outside the Sheba farms region, situated on the border between Lebanon and the northern tip of the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. The village seems to have existed in ambiguity for many years. Prior to the Six-Day War in 1967, the village came under Syrian control. Israel did not capture the village when it seized the Golan Heights in 1967, believing it to be Lebanese territory. However, Israel invaded Lebanon in 1978, and in 1981 the village was included in Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. When Israel withdrew from South Lebanon in 2000, the United Nations drew the Blue Line straight through the center of the village. The northern part of Al-Ghajja was given to Lebanon. The southern part remained under Israeli occupation.
We agreed to divide Al-Ghajja village into two parts. Israel remains in the occupied part of the town. We don't enter the Lebanese part, but it remains under UN responsibility. Israel exploited this situation during the July 2006 war, and again practiced the same old violations by raising the demarcation issue. The borders do not need to be marked. Our borders are clear.
In the 2006 war, Israel reoccupied the northern part of Al-Ghajja. Israel now controls both parts of the village, contravening UN Resolution 1701, which ended the war in 2006.
In connection with Ghajja, Resolution 1701 is very clear. Israel must withdraw south of the Blue Line, which is in the middle of the village. Our talks are about security and humanitarian arrangements to be put in place following the Israeli withdrawal. But Israeli withdrawal is not negotiable. They have to withdraw.
The village of Al-Ghajja lies beside the Al-Wazani River, a factor that highlights how border disputes are complicated by the importance of water issues in this region. The residents of the village are mostly Alawai, a branch of Shia Islam. They stress their Syrian identity and their desire to return to Syrian sovereignty. But Israeli journalist Amos Harel doubts this is a genuine demand.
I think that if you talk to the residents there and not hold a camera and a microphone at them, you hear differently. Some of them would like the connection with Israel. They get better facilities, they get better medical care and so on. I suspect from my visits, it was a long time ago, but from my visits to the village, that not everybody there is too crazy about becoming Lebanese or Syrian again.
Every time an Israeli official visits Al-Ghajja village, its residents affirm they are Syrian Arabs and stress that they wish to return to their homeland, Syria.
On August the 5th, 2009, Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman took a controversial trip to Al-Ghajja, visiting both parts of the village.
The Israeli Foreign Minister's visit to the village was a violation of Lebanese sovereignty. The United Nations should not have stood by idle in the face of his sneaking into Lebanese territory. It's unacceptable.
The dispute over the Sheba farms and the unusual case of Al-Ghajja village means tensions remain high in the region. For its part, Israel feels it has conceded enough.
The way the Israelis see it, we obeyed in all parts except two. The question of Raja, which wasn't decided and is still debated, and the question of Shaba Farms, where there Israel claims that it's actually Syrian territory and not Lebanese, and this should be discussed in the future according to a peace agreement between Israel and Syria.
Lebanon and Syria disagree with this interpretation. The result is a dangerous deadlock in which diplomacy is frozen and war often becomes a continuation of politics by other means. Hezbollah justifies its armed presence and resistance by citing Israeli occupation of Lebanese land. And Israeli forces regularly violate Lebanese sovereignty of its air, land and sea. The mission of the UN peacekeepers along the Blue Line is an unenviable task. The border disputes keep tensions high.
The question of the Shaba Farms remain, and as we know, until now it's been used as an issue. It hasn't been solved, and I suspect that it will take time before somebody reaches an agreement or a solution there.
Israel never concedes unless it is pressured, and unless it is paying a larger price than it already pays. No one can make it pay that price except the resistance.
With diplomacy seemingly stuck, tensions remain high across one of the most volatile front lines of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Business Latest is brought to you by Capco in just about everything.